Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or a personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Dr. Jaime Zuckerman. Dr. Z is a national expert in narcissism and narcissistic abuse. Dr. Z received her undergraduate degree from The Ohio State University and a doctorate in clinical psychology from LaSalle University. Dr. Z grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia and has trained at several well-known Philadelphia area hospitals, including Temple University, Friends, Pennsylvania's Center for the University of Pennsylvania Center for Cognitive Therapy also. She is a relationship coach for both men and women nationwide who are experiencing narcissistic abuse in their current relationships and for those who have experienced this type of abuse in the past. Dr. Z is also a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice, specializing in the treatment of adults with anxiety, mood disorders, and relationship difficulties. So, Dr. Z, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thanks for having me. You made me sound really smart.
It was so much. I got a little tongue-tied with all of your accolades.
No, thank you for having me.
I gave a bit of an introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your story and how you got to who and where you are today?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Philadelphia, or outside of Philadelphia, I should say. And I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I have a private practice in Ardmore, which is, again, right outside of Philadelphia, where we see patients with anxiety, depression. But I specialize in narcissistic abuse. So I offer coaching virtually all across the country, internationally, working with people who are either in a narcissistic abusive relationship or trying to get out of one, or on the other side of one, which can be equally as, abusive. And, anywhere from a significant other to a friend, to a parent, to a colleague. I kind of see all different types of relationships. So, that's what I do. I have 2 books that came out last year, 2 workbooks, Find Your Calm and Find Good Habits. You can get them wherever you get your books, but it focuses on kind of tangible behavioral strategies on how to manage your anxiety, how to stay present focused, and how to set and maintain healthy patterns.
Thanks. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned to you, I've been following you for such a long time and I love your work. And I put so much into this because I know that for someone like you with your experience and your expertise, we can really dive deep into what narcissism is and really give a lot of tools and explanations that can help someone unpack something that they may not even be aware that they're dealing with. So to start off, I wanted to talk about one of your posts. And that one was, sometimes people pretend that you're a bad person so that they don't feel guilty for how they treated you. So can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So oftentimes, and this isn't just obviously for people that are narcissists, but oftentimes when we are sitting with emotional discomfort, so that ickiness that we really don't like to feel, whether it's anxiety, anger, sadness, frustration, a lot of times, we do things to avoid those feelings, whether it's sleeping too much, overworking, overeating, doing drugs, or drinking too much, or just immersing yourself in something and focusing solely on that at the expense of other things, or not putting your needs first, whatever that looks like, because we don't want to feel discomfort. So what people sometimes do is, if you are a trigger to some of those emotions that this person has that they don't want to feel, one of the ways that they avoid feeling those things is to make you or the other person out, the trigger, to be a bad person, so that that person doesn't have to be face to face with how you're making them feel. Or if the other person is accountable for harming you or upsetting you or doing something wrong, and they don't want to take accountability, it's much easier for them to make you out to be the bad person, so that when you start defending yourself, now that ickiness that they feel, now they don't have to deal with it at all, because now the whole focus is on the other person defending why they're not a bad person. So the whole entire topic is now off the table and it's focused on in the wrong direction on the wrong topic.
Wow, that's pretty deep. And that's a great explanation of how it can happen, or how someone can try and avoid feeling a certain way by just dumping all of it onto you. So now there's an argument about you instead of what the actual real,
Exactly.
main reason is. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what does it mean to be disconnected from yourself? And is it possible to build a deep connection with someone who is disconnected from themselves?
So I think when someone's disconnected from themselves, I think there's so many levels to that and so many reasons why somebody could be, quote, disconnected from themselves. So, you have in one extreme personality disorders where a person is disconnected from their sense of self, their core self. It's almost like some people say it doesn't exist. Some people will say it morphs into whoever they're around. So they really don't have that core sense of self. So there is this disconnect between them and their sense of self. And you actually, people that have experienced interacting with people with personality disorders, or somebody who's worked with people with personality disorders, you can almost, it's like palpable. You can feel that awkward disconnect when you're speaking with them. It's like you can't really put it into words, but clinicians will know what I'm talking about. It kind of is this weird, like, you can't, I don't know how to put it into words, but you feel that disconnect, and I think that's exactly what you're talking about. You can sense it. But then there's also people who are just very, let's say, emotionally reserved or emotionally disconnected, and they may come off as cold. They may come off as disconnected because in order to be connected, they have to feel all the stuff they don't want to feel. So I think it's really on a continuum of somebody's ability to connect versus their unwillingness to connect with themselves. And I think it kind of it vacillates. Personality disorders are unique, though. That's kind of a separate entity. But we all at different points in our lives disconnect from ourselves, sometimes as a form of survival, sometimes as a form of just needing to get through the day, sometimes just because we just need to shut down. Right. And so it's not so much that the disconnecting is a negative thing. It's realizing you've disconnected, bringing yourself back to the present and refocusing.
Mm. Now, is it possible to build a deep relationship with someone who is constantly disconnected or refuses to actually feel their feelings?
I think it depends on what you want out of the relationship. But if somebody's disconnected from themselves and unwilling to feel their feelings, and you expect them as a friend or as a partner to be emotionally available to you, I think you have to manage your expectations. If that's something that's not important to you and you have more of a partnership relationship, or maybe you work with this person so you don't need that level of emotional availability. So I think it depends on what you want in the relationship. But generally speaking, if you have somebody who is extremely disconnected emotionally, disconnected from themselves, and they are unaware and unwilling to work on it, you will always feel like there's a wedge or a wall between the two of you. If they're willing to work on it, that's different. But without any of that, then it's going to be really difficult to build that connection. And I don't want to say impossible, because nothing's impossible, but it's going to be an uphill battle constantly.
Gotcha. Something that can cause someone to be disconnected from themselves is trauma from being emotionally abused, or maybe not getting their needs met emotionally as a child. What can emotional abuse look like?
As a child, as growing up as a child, or just in
Or just
general?
in general?
So emotional abuse typically takes the form of determining what that person's weaknesses are, what their vulnerabilities are, what they're most passionate about, and going after those things deliberately. Something like if with narcissists, they'll kind of get what your vulnerabilities are in the beginning because they suck you in, they make you think you're close, you share all these deep things, then they hold it against you. So if I said, let's say, you know, my father left when I was really young and I've always had this void. I feel like, was I, I hear this all the time, like, was I not good enough, or why'd he leave? A narcissist will then take that later on, let's say, and say something like, no wonder why your dad left, or, no one. So they will deliberately use things with emotional abuse that target your weaknesses, your insecurities. And that's specifically what they go for. They really kind of get get to you in a very emotional, like you said, emotional place. If they say something that's irrelevant to you that you don't really care about, it's not going to affect you. So emotional abuse really is based on your hot buttons and your core kind of those core soft spots for you.
How can emotional abuse affect the brain and the nervous system?
Yeah, great question. So, emotional abuse actually causes brain changes, and we know this, and it changes, your chemistry of your brain. So, when you're dealing, let's say, growing up with emotional abuse and neglect, and you never really know what you're going to get from your parent. One day they are loving and caring, and then the next day, literally nothing changed, but for whatever reason, they tell you you're worthless and you're not going to amount to anything, and they wish you had never been born. So you're hearing these things back and forth, back and forth. You never know what you're going to get because it's not contingent on what you do, but they make you think that it is, right? So you're getting these spurts of dopamine, right? Constantly back and forth, and you're seeking it out, which is why it's almost like an addictive quality, because you just are hoping to get a little bit more of that nurturing, a little bit more of that love, and they'll give it to you, but in little increments that's inconsistent. And it creates this just constant really like addiction based model, and you see those changes in the brain, and you see that the cortisol levels go up and your dopamine is intermittent. And so it really, when people say that your feelings and all that stuff in psychology is separate from your physical self, they're really kind of dead wrong. They're very much interconnected, because the degree to which you're stressed means your cortisol levels go up. The degree to which you're in an abusive relationship, you get these spurts of dopamine, and it's very complicated. It absolutely affects your brain 100% and your body. It puts you more at risk for heart disease. It puts you more at risk for cancer, high blood pressure, all of these things.
Wow. I think hearing you explain it like that and talking about the deep effects it can have, you really can't ignore emotional abuse anymore, or you can't say it's so different from physical abuse. I mean, it is different in the way it may happen, but the effects it has on you is serious. It really is. And it can
Yeah.
cause someone to have lifelong effects.
Oh yeah, and the tricky thing about emotional abuse is that it's very subtle at times, right? So not that one's better than the other; they're both horrific. Physical abuse, there's not necessarily as much subtlety to it, whereas emotional abuse that often leads to the physical abuse, it can be very subtle. It can be things like they'll take something that's yours and hide it and then accuse you of losing it, right? And they gaslight you in that way. That's very much emotional abuse. Or make you believe that the people that you associate with can't be trusted, and so you're not allowed to be around them, and so they isolate you. I mean, that's all emotional abuse. So that's why people don't, it's not like it happens all at once. It's very subtle. It's like a faucet leaking, just dripping,
Mm.
dripping, dripping, and you don't really pay attention to it until your entire floor is covered in water. It's kind of like that. It's like you don't really realize it until you're really in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, is emotional abuse the same as narcissistic abuse?
Mm-mm. No. Emotional. So narcissistic abuse, all narcissistic abuse has emotional abuse as a component to it. But
Okay.
not all emotional abuse is narcissistic abuse. They're different. So emotional abuse, not minimizing any of this. Let's say that you have a parent that drinks a lot, and when they're drunk, they say horrible things to you. When they're sober, they don't, right? Not that that's healthy by any means, but that person is not necessarily a narcissist. And so the other types of abuse that are common to narcissism aren't they're not, those patterns aren't being engaged in. It's not there. Somebody could be emotionally abusive to one person, but only at certain times, at certain points in their life. Whereas a narcissist, that abuse is chronic and constant. It's never not happening. And if it's not happening for a very deliberate reason. Maybe they're trying to
Gotcha.
suck you back in or something like that. So emotional abuse, anyway, you look at it, is wrong, horrible, and should not occur. But not all emotional abuse is a narcissist. You also could have really toxic relationship patterns that you grew up modeling that are not narcissistic. But let's say somebody, for whatever reason, says something to you that makes you feel insecure or makes you feel triggers that worthlessness, mindset that you have. you may have learned over time that when someone does that to you, some people may shut down, some people may lash out. When you lash out, you may be really verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, but that doesn't mean you're a narcissist. So it's still very different.
I see. Thank you for that explanation. I mean, just listening to you, it is quite clear that you know what you're talking about. And
Well, that's good.
like I
I
said, you
never know
could
if I'm
probably
just speaking into the wind.
no. Like I said, you probably could have answered these questions blindfolded with your hands
No,
tied
these are
behind your
actually
back.
excellent questions because they're definitely questions that I get, and I think sometimes people don't know exactly how to formulate these questions. Like they know what they want to ask, but these are really they're really good questions. So I'm happy.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you. So you are, and it's quite evident, like I said, a national expert in narcissism and narcissistic abuse. So this is a question that I think is very targeted for your expertise and knowledge, because a lot of times the discussion about narcissism is kind of centered around a partner in a relationship. But who else can be a narcissist?
Anybody. Your mom, your dad, your sibling, your boss, your friends, your grandmother. I mean, anybody. Anybody.
Hmm. So in a relationship where you may be dealing with a narcissistic sibling or a narcissistic coworker or your boss is narcissistic, are there different levels of how each relationship can affect you?
Sure. I think that it really depends on how much control you have over your ability to get out of the relationship and set boundaries.
Hmm.
Because they will not change. And so if you have the ability, let's say, to switch departments at work, or you have the ability to copy somebody else on the email every time you send it, or you have an HR department that can handle it for you, or you're able to leave your job and find another one if you're fortunate enough. There's ways that you can manage that, right? When you have a partner, right, who's a narcissist, you have it's much more difficult. Let's say if you're not married and you don't have children, it's not easy, but it's the process of leaving is typically easier because you don't have any joint assets, you don't have any homes together, that kind of thing. The more intertwined you are, the less options you have to get out easily, the more damage it does to you as far as the trauma that you're gonna receive from it, because it really has to do with your ability to the options you have to break the connection.
Gotcha. Um, so going back a little bit to the relationship of parent and child, as a child, our relationship with our caregivers or our immediate or extended family, or even those who had a hand in our upbringing, can be the foundation for so many things that have a deep effect on us for the rest of our lives. If those individuals had a difficult childhood, didn't get their needs met, or they were abused, they may not have the capacity to meet our needs, or there may be some unhealthy coping strategies that they learned. And I say all that to ask this next question. Can parents or caregivers with good intentions still be narcissistic?
That's an excellent question. No, they can't. Inherent in a diagnosis of narcissism is lack of empathy, lack of accountability, looking at other people, including your children, as interchangeable objects that depend on what you need them for in that given moment. It's about power, it's about manipulation, it's about control. Other people do not have emotions, according to them, don't have opinions, they don't matter. So you can have a parent that is extremely toxic, is neglectful, is abusive, not capable of meeting your needs as a child. And at the same time, they may have had, let's say they were a single parent, they were working four jobs, they still couldn't make ends meet, they were struggling with an alcohol problem, they had no support system. That's going to be a really difficult. That's going to be a really difficult parenting path that you're on, because I mean, I can't. I have three kids. The thought of having to do that on my own is I can't fathom that. So
Mm.
put into that all the other variables where you're working 4 jobs, you're struggling to make ends meet, and there's substance abuse, or there's just everybody's stressed. You're going to have a high conflict, more likely than not, environment. Does that mean that the parent doesn't have good intentions? Absolutely not. It has nothing to do with that. They're doing the best there's certain situations where I say they're doing the best they can with what they have. Period. That's not narcissistic abuse. That's very different, because if you ask that parent, even if they don't go about it in the right way, if you ask them why they're doing it's to provide for their family, it's to provide for their children. They're routinely putting themselves last to be able to make ends meet and do these things for their family. How they go about doing it, I mean, can I fault them for losing their mind every night? No, of course not. So I think it's important to look at the context and look. It's all about the function of the person's behavior, meaning the reason why they're doing what they're doing. So not the superficial level. So let's say a narcissist is working 4 jobs trying to make ends meet. The function of them doing it is not going to be to provide for their family. It's going to be to provide for themselves. It's going to be to maybe have people feel sorry for them, to give them. I mean, it's everything but what a good intentioned parent would be doing.
Wow, that was a great explanation. And I think that a lot of times, because narcissism is something that I feel is kind of new for lay people who aren't, clinicians or
Yes.
therapists or what have you. So we may get a little confused with what's what, because the waters are sometimes muddied, and we may feel like someone who does something wrong, or if we, had some instances where we were not treated the best, that we might, automatically say narcissist, narcissist, narcissist
Mm-hmm.
for those instances. So I think the way you clarified that was very good.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, people can be a-holes, but not be narcissists, right? I mean, that happens all the time. And the other thing too is I was just talking about this with somebody, another psychologist. When I was in graduate school, and I don't know if it's different now, but I know when I was in graduate school, when we learned about personality disorders, we really learned about borderline personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder was kind of not really discussed or spoken about. We learned about it, but we learned about it in a very specific context, like grandiose, which they are, louder than life, like almost like you would know a narcissist if you ran into one on the street. But that's not always how it. And in fact, that's most of the time, at least the people that I work with, that's not what they're running into. It's not this, like character that they, it can be very subtle and coercive, that coercive abuse. So I think clinicians didn't get decent training in it, to be honest with you. And I think that because there's this misconception, people say, I get this comment all the time on my posts, like, stop diagnosing everyone with narcissism. It's such a rare percentage of the population. Correct, it is. But here's the problem with that. That percentage is most likely grossly, like, just underdiagnosed, because people with narcissistic personality disorder, they don't go to treatment. They're not being tracked. They never get help. So it's kind of like, well, of course the numbers look like no one, it's all getting diagnosed kind of secondhand, and no one's getting help. So why, that doesn't even make any sense. Of course it's low.
Hmm.
So I always caution people with that. Just because it's low, is it rare because it's a personality disorder? Absolutely. But it is a big misconception that it's as rare as people think it is. I mean, it's still rare, but it's underdiagnosed because they do not present for treatment. And you can imagine people that are survivors or victims of narcissistic abuse, they're not reporting it because they're scared. They don't have anyone to report it to. And half the time, they don't even know. They are so confused as to what's going on, thinking they're crazy, doubting the abuse to begin with, that there's no way they're going to report that. And to who? How would you even, do you know what I'm saying? So it's
Hmm.
kind of a faulty percentage, in my clinical opinion.
So you mentioned that it is a personality disorder, and then you mentioned a type, which is grandiose, and I've also heard of covert. Are those the only type, the two types of narcissism, or is there more?
So there's overt, there's covert, there's it's very, the language is very tricky. There was actually a really good video that I watched and a really good article that I read, and I'm blanking on the name, and I can send you the link to send to people. It did a phenomenal job explaining the nuances of the different categories of narcissists. But I think for the purpose of this, I think what people need to understand is that you're going to have somebody who is larger than life, who's, very charming and gregarious and just like just in the limelight. You're also going to have something that's more covert abuse outwardly. The internal stuff can be the same on both ends, which is why it gets really confusing. So it's like, I don't even want to, the covert narcissist is going to be somebody that outwardly, great, they take their kids to football games, they go to the PTA meetings, they're at their job, they're great, they're philanthropic, they do all these things. And then behind closed doors, they are horrifically, emotionally, physically, financially, sexually abusive to their partner, to whomever it is, to their child. So it's very hidden. And so you're not always going to point to someone and be like, oh, yep, they're a narcissist. There's a whole different element to that as well. That's why when people say narcissists have a hard time controlling their anger when they have these rage episodes, no, it's the total opposite. They have extremely good control over their anger for the simple fact that they can be out and about at a dinner party. They're great. Soon as that door closes, boom. So they know exactly how to control their anger, and they save it for very specific situations. And that's more of that covert narcissistic abuse that you see.
I've heard that grandiose narcissists, their brains actually don't allow them to understand the concepts of anything other than where they put themselves. So you could try to explain something to them, and they actually cannot grasp that concept because they have elevated themselves so high above everything and everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree with that. There are brain differences, actual structural differences, and things like that. Whether that is when they're born or it changes over time based on their patterns and things like that. But that's really true of any narcissist. Explaining something to them or trying to get them to see your way. I mean, it won't even, they will never internalize that and process it and do anything with it, whether it's because they don't want to or they think it's irrelevant or it just doesn't matter, whatever. Or if they do it, they're going to have to feel something they don't want to feel, and that shame and that guilt start kind of bubbling up, so they deflect it completely by lashing out or raging against you or giving you the silent treatment. So you'll see any of that in response to trying to get them to understand something. It just won't happen. They may
Something you
pretend to
just
get it if it benefits them, but they're not taking that anywhere.
Something you just mentioned was shame, and I've heard that at the core of narcissism is shame. Is that true?
So depending on, yes, I would say generally speaking, yes, that there's this element of shame and kind of disgust with themselves and guilt that is so intolerable for them, so brutally intolerable for them, that if it is ever triggered and it starts to get wound up in them, let's say, they will never allow that to come out. They will do something to push that way back down. Which is why with narcissists, when you set very strict boundaries with them, and let's say they're getting those boundaries from all over and they can't get that supply, that attention, that reaction from people, and then they're just stuck with themselves, that's when you typically see a narcissist kind of start to crumble, fall apart, because that feeling is so intolerable to them. The problem with narcissists is that they're so good at conning people to suck them in that rarely are they not without supply, because they're very good at finding it.
Can you define supply?
Yeah. So the analogy I give is like a gas station, right? So they are a car, right? The narcissist is the car, and they go to a pump and they get their fuel, right? Then They drive around and they go back to that pump and they refuel. Eventually that pump's going to be empty. Or they're just bored with that pump because they know it too well. It's not as fun anymore. So now they go to a different one, and then they go to a different one. And so there's all these different places, these gas stations that they're filling up their tank with. If all the gas stations shut down and now the car can't get any gas, now what happens? Now the car just kind of loses momentum and is stuck with itself. So that's kind of the goal of what you want to do, is kind of block them, set these boundaries all over for them. But supply is any type of reaction that they can bring up in you, the degree to which they can control you, the degree to which they can manipulate you, the degree to which they knock you down, right, and watch you scramble to pick yourself back up. Anything that they feel they kind of not caused in you, but like kind of had the ability to manipulate you to be able to get this response that they want. So it kind of makes them feel powerful. It makes them feel in control. It makes them feel useful. That's how they operate, through supply, which is why a lot of narcissists, usually have a lot of partners, right? Like the infidelity is extremely high with narcissists because they kind of always have people around in the wings that if this goes bad or they get in an argument or they're just bored, they can go to somebody else. They just always need to be filled up. And so they get that, whether it's attention, whether it's love, whether it's sex, whether it's money, whether it's a place to stay, whether it's somebody telling them that they're the funniest person they've ever met, it doesn't matter. Whether it's giving someone the silent treatment and that person begging them to tell them, what did I do wrong? Just tell me. All of that is supply.
It's funny because as we're talking, you say something and I completely deviate from the outline just because I want you to pinpoint that. And man, I think that of all the clinicians that I've followed or studied surrounding them, that are narcissist experts or have a background in narcissism, you just kill it. You really do.
Oh, thank you.
You do.
It's so nice.
I just get lost listening to you because you have such an ease with which how you explain this stuff. So it really shows that you're an expert.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Will you tell
true.
my kids that? Because no one listens to me.
I have no problem. Okay, I wanted to circle back a little bit to childhood and parenting and narcissistic parents or a narcissistic family system. And in particular, what does autonomy look like to narcissistic parents?
So autonomy to a narcissistic parent, autonomy of the child to a narcissistic parent, particularly moms in this case. Dads is a little bit different, but particularly for moms, they look at autonomy as abandonment, as rejection, as being rude, as disrespect, as just atrocious behavior. They view it as, they view their child as an extension of them, as an accessory. So the child, if they have any opinion or any view of the world that is different from the narcissistic parent, that is unacceptable. And you'll be punished in some way for that, whether it's silent treatment, it's rage, it's cut off from finances, it's talking badly about you, or, not cooking you dinner one night, whatever the case may be. But you are an extension of them. Therefore, you are not allowed to be your own person. And so any deviation from that, any move towards autonomy, the narcissistic parent is going to look at that, as, how dare you leave me? Look what I've done for you. I've raised you. I've given you this. I've done this for you. I sacrificed my career for you. I sacrificed my life for you. I sacrificed my happiness for you. And now you're going to go to California to go to college, right? Or now you're going to move out, with your girlfriends. Like, how could you do that to me? Or they want to go out with their friends one night and, they're like, I'm so lonely. I don't have anybody. You're just going to leave me here all by myself. Nobody loves me. So it's that kind of thing. And it really wreaks havoc on the relationship, because then the child feels a tremendous amount of irrational guilt, but they feel that guilt and they end up in this real internal struggle between wanting to be autonomous and at the same time wanting to be a good daughter or a good son. And so it's a really, really tough situation. It's actually really heartbreaking to watch.
Mm. You said that that is more so with mothers. So with fathers,
Yeah.
how can a daughter of a narcissistic father go from being daddy's little girl to the black sheep?
So typically somebody will go from being the golden child to the black sheep when they start setting boundaries, when they start, let's say, coming into their own, and maybe who they are is not this idealized version that the parent had for them, who they expected them to be. um, it could be they started figuring out the blueprint of the narcissist's patterns. And so they're able to kind of predict what's going to come next and call them out on these things. So when the message becomes obvious and that child now becomes almost a threat, now they become the black sheep of the family. And now the character assassinations start and all of that stuff. So typically, fathers will look at the child as in the way, baggage, just kind of in the way of them wanting to do what they want to do and live their life. It's less emotional manipulation like the mom. It's more kind of, you're an object. If I need you, I'll let you know. I love you only to the degree that you're useful to me. It's kind of more in that way than it is that really intertwined emotional stuff. I mean, it is there, but it's more so with the mom.
What can cause one child to be treated like the golden child and another to be treated so much differently in a narcissistic family system?
Sometimes it's just arbitrary. Sometimes there is no rhyme or reason. Sometimes it's because that child that they're treating as the golden child is more in line is developing, let's say, academically or socially or in terms of like activities, sports, in a way that they want their child to be. They fit that mold. Then they may be more inclined to favor that child. Or the other child may be not in line with that and maybe more of a boundary setter and maybe more autonomous. And so to punish that child, they're going to favor the other child, even if the other child's not doing anything that they want, but just as kind of a punishment to the other child for setting boundaries. The golden child typically can do no wrong. There's very high expectations put on them. They have no consequences to any action that deserves consequences. So oftentimes the child may grow up, not respecting authority or thinking the rules don't apply to them. What they do doesn't matter because they'll just get out of it anyway. And so it's definitely detrimental. But then again, you could also be the golden child, but then grow up as an adult and let's say you were constantly trying to please your parents because you wanted to stay in that golden child role. And now as an adult, now you're a people pleaser. You're the furthest thing from a narcissist. Now you're so used to taking care of other people or else they won't love you if you're not perfect. So all your needs you put second and take care of this other person so that they'll quote love you. So it really just kind of depends on how it manifests. Just because you have a narcissistic parent does not mean you're going to be a narcissist. So just because you don't have one doesn't mean you won't be a narcissist.
Wow. So something I've heard that is a big part of narcissistic family systems is triangulation. What
Yeah.
is triangulation?
So triangulation occurs when, just like it sounds, let's say like three people, right? The narcissist and let's say two children. The narcissistic parent loves to be the owner of information. They want to be in control of the information and who they let know what to. So they may tell this person this and they may tell this person this. They're the owner of information. And what they do is they use that information against the other person to kind of make the other two people connect. And so they use it as a way to manipulate and usually pit two siblings against each other so that both of those siblings need to go to the source, which would be the narcissistic parent. So the narcissistic parent is always the focal point. It's always the center. But they try to kind of draw a wedge between these two other parties, really confuse them and really disrupt the relationship. And the narcissist parent will oftentimes try to kind of enter in as if they are fixing it, or putting the accountability and the fault on one of the other children to gang up on them. It's a manipulation tactic for whatever they need it for.
Wow. So another question I wanted to ask, and this is kind of more broad in just the spectrum of narcissism. Do narcissists show up because they care, or so that people can think they care?
So people think they care.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And if we were to really look at that as a whole, that could be so many things. And it really gets to the root that narcissists really just don't care about anything other than appearances and making sure that they are the ones that are seen, and that, they look good and they have all the light on themselves.
Mm-hmm. And that their needs are met, and that they're in charge and they're in control. And however they need to maintain power and control, they'll do. And if you happen to be in the way and get hurt in the process, well, that's your fault.
Is it normal for survivors of narcissistic abuse to feel like they're at fault?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it takes years for somebody to actually truly feel that that it didn't somehow happen because of them. Even if they understand the patterns and things like that, there's still for a long time a piece of them that feels like, well, maybe if I hadn't done this, or maybe because they're conditioned for so long, and they're fed this narrative for so long, that if you just loved me more, I wouldn't do this. If you just listened to me, I wouldn't need to punch a wall. If you just did what I asked you to do, then this wouldn't happen. And they're fed that for so long, and they're gaslit for so long, that they lose perspective, and it's such a hidden abuse that they don't, and they're isolated from family and friends over time, because that's what the narcissist will do. So you have no one to go to, you have no one to talk to the abuse about. And even if you try explaining it, it's so sometimes unbelievably unimaginable and so manipulative that when you try to explain it, you sound like you're crazy. And you've been taught for so long that you are crazy and that no one will believe you. So it really, yes. I mean, short answer, yes. People constantly think that it's their fault for a very long time.
Now, as someone is getting healthy and learning to separate themselves from the abuse or a narcissistic relationship, how hard can it be to grieve the loss of someone who's still alive?
So grieving the loss of someone who's still alive in any type of breakup is really, really hard. I think in my work with people, and I just think that it's because you have very little control over it, and there's almost no what's the word I'm looking for? Closure. There's no closure in a way, right? If somebody passes away, not that that's better, but if someone passes away, there's this kind of definitive closure. And so when you're grieving the loss of somebody who's still alive, even if it's not a narcissistic relationship, it's really difficult, because you wonder, what are they doing and where are they at? And so you're kind of left with that. For narcissistic relationships, the thing that I have people focus on a lot, because they'll oftentimes feel stupid or guilty or wrong for missing somebody who was so unbelievably abusive, because their brain, which is normal, will focus on the highs, right? And go back to the times where they felt good, because that's what happens in addictive model. I mean, that's what it is. So what I tell them is that, in the beginning of the relationship, during that love bombing stage, when they're sucking you in and they're doing all these wonderful things. You're my soulmate. I love you. I've never felt like this before. And they're, buying you gifts and traveling and all of these things that feel great. That was never them. Because you'll hear them say, I just want him or her to get back to how they were when we first started. The problem with that is that was never them to begin with. They were acting. They were conning you. So the person you see at the end of a narcissistic abusive relationship, that is the person. There is nowhere to get back to, because that wasn't them to begin with. And so when a person realizes, oh my God, so wait, this person never loved me, like they never loved me, they never loved our kids, like wait, I don't, they're with someone again like a week later. Like it's so mind-blowing because it makes you realize, wow, they genuinely didn't care, and they don't care about their children, and it's very unsettling. um and then people have a really hard time also accepting the fact that the person they were with for that long was not the person that they thought they were. There was never that person to begin with, and that's a huge loss for people.
Okay, so building off of that, do victims of narcissistic abuse immediately or stop loving their abuser, or is it usually that they stop loving themselves?
um they, by the time they leave, their self-concept, their self-esteem, their self-worth is just pretty non-existent. They don't know who they are. They don't even know what music they like. They don't know what clothes they like. They don't know what their favorite color is because they were told for years who to be and how to act. So their self-concept is really non-existent. I know that and a lot of people feel uncomfortable with this. It is very common and normal to still feel like you love that person despite the fact that they hurt you so often. And you see this a lot with children who were abused growing up. They'll say yes, but it's my mother and I still love her, or it's yes, my father, I still. So it's a really difficult thing to separate. And what I tell people is you're entitled to feel however you want to feel. We just want to make sure that your behaviors are healthy. How you feel is how you feel. That has no bearing in reality. You feel and think however you want, as long as your behaviors are consistent with getting you to where you want to be.
That was such a nugget, man. That was so good. What effect can these relationships have on self confidence?
Oh, it demolishes it. It just, that's their goal. Their goal is to break break you down, break that self-confidence down, and just make it non-existent. And people often think narcissists go for people who have low self-esteem, have poor self-concept, who are meek and kind of no backbone, and the opposite is true. Narcissists tend to go for people who are very smart, have a lot going for them, are well known, well liked, probably successful, very attractive, just like very like kind of a good package, right? Like the whole package. That's what they want. And the reason for that is because one, they like to use their limelight, right? They like to feed off their success. They like to have them on their arm and look good. But more importantly, it's to knock them down. The further they can knock them down, the more supply it is for the narcissist. They date somebody in the beginning that has no self-esteem, so low. I mean, the narcissist has nowhere to knock them down to. That doesn't give them any sort of reaction. So who you see at the end of a narcissistic relationship, as far as the survivor, is going to be extremely different than how they started out.
So as you're breaking away, there was something that another post of yours I saw that said, "Trust patterns, not apologies."
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of explain what that means?
Yeah. So I tend to be very behavioral in my approach to treating patients and stuff. So not everybody will agree with me on this, but I I am a strong advocate for people focusing solely on behaviors because that's real, right? We can think and we can have thoughts and feelings, and it's not that they're not important, but you can still go to work and at the same time not feel like going to work. Your thoughts and your feelings don't dictate your behavior. So I could get up and, say, I hate my job. If I choose not to go to work, then I don't go to work. But I can still hate my job and at the same time go to work. They don't cancel each other out. So I tell people, if you try to change your thought or you change your feeling without giving yourself a new experience to draw upon, that doesn't do anything, because you could sit on your couch and worry for an hour. Have you actually changed anything? No, you're still sitting in the same spot on your couch. You haven't actually done anything. So it's about changing your patterns, changing your behaviors to give yourself a new experience to draw upon, which will then change your thoughts and your feelings because you saw that you did it and it turned out okay, or you saw that you can still go to work and maybe the day wasn't that bad. So but if you lay in bed all day and try to not hate your job, well, that's never going to happen. So with narcissists, I tell people you can never look at the words that they're saying, ever. Everything they say and do, you have to look at the underlying function. So the why. Why are they doing this particular behavior right now at this particular time? And you look to see kind of what their motive is. So, for example, this happened a lot over Mother's Day. They may do something like, drop the kids off at the wrong time just to mess up your schedule. And instead of freaking out about what they said and arguing with them about the drop off and this, I would tell them to take a step back and look at the pattern. What did they do? They dropped the kids off late. Why? Oh, it's Mother's Day. They wanted to ruin my day. Oh, okay. I get it now. That's what you focus on, not the words, not the apologies, not none of that. It doesn't mean anything. You always want to focus on the behavior.
Wow.
Sorry for that noise. I think they're mowing the neighbor's lawn.
That is so difficult, such a difficult pill to swallow that on a day like Mother's Day, your parent, your mom, could do something to sabotage your day. But also, it can be hurtful and it could be true. And you need, like you said, to look at the actual behavior so that you understand the pattern.
Yeah. And you respond to that, not the words. You respond to the function of the behavior, not what they're saying. And you set the boundary based on that, not getting into this dialogue and this argument with them because it goes nowhere.
What tends to happen as you're getting healthy and a narcissist is exposed and the truth around all the abuse and dysfunction is starting to become known?
They will bash your character. They will spread lies. They will do whatever they can to make you out to be the crazy one so that your credibility is at stake, so that people won't believe you. Well, they can't believe you because you're an alcoholic, or you have a drug problem, or you're abusive to your children. Whatever the case may be, they will spread rumors that you are cheating. They'll spread rumors that you have some sort of issue. They will immediately post pictures of them with their new supply, their new person, because and these pictures look like they're having the best time and everything's so great and wonderful, because clearly the other person is the one that was wrong, because look, they're fully capable of being a wonderful person in this new relationship. So, again, you have to look at the function. Why are they doing this? Well, they're doing this to ruin your credibility because now you're a threat.
Wow. Okay. So another question on healing and separating. As someone starts to heal, there may be some anger that starts to surface as they realize the patterns. Should anger be avoided, or should someone sit in it, and why?
Anger should never be avoided. Whatever emotion comes up for you in any given moment, you should always sit with. You want to make sure that I always tell people, don't worry about trying to figure out why you're angry. You know why you're angry, right? Like, you don't have to go back and figure out it. You know why you're angry. You just got out of a very toxic relationship. You were lied, you were tricked, and you gave up, as you feel, years of your life. You're allowed to be angry. So I tell people, validate every emotion you have. There's nothing wrong with feeling anger. It's part of this process. What you don't want to do, the more you try to avoid an emotion or avoid feeling something, the bigger it gets. And the example I give is if let's say you're having dinner and there's a train tracks behind your house, and the train goes by and it's so loud, right? And it's ruining your dinner, and it's just going on forever, and you can't hear anybody talking anymore. So you go out back and you put your hand up in front of the train to try to stop it. It makes sense, right? Like, I don't want this noise to continue, so I'm going to stop it. But it's kind of like your thoughts. But in actuality, really what you're doing is you're keeping the noise stuck by trying to stop it. You're just leaving it outside your house. So the noise is still very much there. It's the same thing with a thought. The more you try to not think it, or a feeling, the more you try to not feel angry, the more stuck you're keeping it. You have to feel it and experience it and let it pass through. The more you try to hold it in and ignore it and avoid it by whatever means, drinking, working too much, whatever it is, the larger it becomes, the more it grows.
Wow, that was a great analogy. Um, like I said when we started, I was super happy to do this with you because you are so good at what you do,
Oh, thank
and I'm
you.
so grateful. So,
Thank
last
you.
question I want to ask is if you could use your platform to encourage anyone who may be struggling or stuck in a relationship that's abusive with someone who's narcissistic and they want to talk to somebody about their feelings or what they're going through, what would you say and how would you encourage them?
If they want to start this process,
Right.
um, that it's going to be difficult. They can't do it alone. Um, find somebody who understands narcissistic abuse and start, working with them if you can. Understand that by no means is this your fault, even if you feel like it's your fault. You didn't cause this. It will be like this with anybody else that they're with. And that everything you're feeling is completely normal and completely valid. And there is another side to this. It's a long journey and a long process, but you can and you will get through this.
That was great advice. Thank you so much for this, Dr. Z. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
If somebody wants to find you online or on social media, where can they find you?
Um, my Instagram is Dr. Z Psychologist, so DRZ Psychologist. That has like it was taken, so there's a period and an underscore somewhere in there. But if you just put in Dr. Z Psychologist, it'll show up. My website is drjamiezuckerman.com. And in my bio on my Instagram page, there's a Linktree link that can take you to, a bunch of stuff that I've written and resources. And I have workshops on my website that you can download. And yeah, so that's where you can find me.
And then you also mentioned some books.
Oh, yeah, I have two workbooks, one for managing anxiety and one for changing unhealthy patterns and learning how to maintain them over time. The anxiety one's called Find Your Calm, and the other one is called Find Good Habits, and they're both available on Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble, and there's a link on my website.
Mhm. All right. Well, again, Dr. Z, this has been so, so good. I'm grateful for your time that you were able to do this with me and for who you are, what you do, and the way you do it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.